Well, thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me here to speak today. And particular personal thanks from me for holding your conference this year in Westminster, so close to our offices at the Institute of Economic Affairs. For those of us who seek to influence thought and opinion in all political parties, it's wonderful to actually finally have a party conference on our doorstep, because a number of my IEA colleagues and I have recently returned from the Liberal Democrats' annual gathering in Glasgow. What a depressing experience. Faced with an enormous budget deficit of £120 billion, an ongoing squeeze on the cost of living, a very fragile economic recovery. What were the Lib Dems' big policy announcements this week? A 5p tax on a plastic bag and a £600 million splurge on ensuring that young children of rich parents can enjoy a free school dinner. I'm not even sure that these interfering, expensive policies are internally consistent. If little Johnny wants to take home the remains of his school lunch in a doggy bag, does he still get it for free, or does he have to stump up 5 pence like the rest of us? These are the great affairs of state that the Liberal Democrats are grappling with. But look, I'm not here to talk about the Liberal Democrats. I'm here, I hope, to provide some food for thought for you guys in the UK Independence Party. And I'm not even really going to talk about the European Union. I'm barely going to mention it. No, I want to give you some ideas about how we might tackle Britain's grave problems here at home. Your party is perhaps best known for its commitment to leave the European Union. But in recent times, you've broadened your agenda to include a whole swathe of policy ideas that are much closer to the UK. And I think you're right to do so. Because even if you achieve your aim, even if the UK commits to leaving the European Union by the end of this week, there is a whole lot of mess to clear up right here in Whitehall, and an enormous amount of domestic reform required. Put simply, the British state is far, far too large, and the private free side of our economy is far too small. You point out, obviously, the trivial, petty-minded, meddling, invasive nature of the Brussels bureaucracy, but let's not kid ourselves that the corridors of power here in London are awash with free market libertarians, just aching to be untied from the Brussels leash so they can go about slashing red tape, eliminating waste and cutting government spending. Sir Humphrey Appleby is not a Thatcherite free market capitalist. And in order to give you just an idea of the tide of regulation and regulatory ideas we face, not just from Brussels, but here at home, let me give you a heavily abridged, I say heavily abridged, list of policies that are presently on the agenda of the public health lobby. A minimum pricing for alcohol, plain packaging for tobacco, a 20% tax on fizzy drinks, a fat tax, a sugar tax, a fine for not being a member of a gymnasium, graphic warnings on bottles of alcohol, banning parents from taking their kids to school by car, a ban on gambling machines in betting shops, a ban on smoking in cars, a ban on anyone born after the year 2000 ever buying tobacco, a ban on the sale of hot food to children before 5 p.m, a ban on multi-bag packs of crisps, a complete ban on alcohol advertising, a ban on electronic cigarettes, a ban on menthol cigarettes, a ban on large servings of fizzy drinks, and a complete ban on advertising any product at all to any child. And these are policies that have just been dreamed up in the last few months. Or look at our financial services sector, supposedly a hive of devil-may-care, Wild West free market capitalism. Well, the last time I looked at the FSA regulatory handbook, it contained 10 sections. The section entitled Prudential Standard is divided into 11 subsections. The subsection Prudential Sourcebook for banks, building societies and investment firms is made up of 14 subsections. The subsection Market Risk is divided into 11 subsections. The subsection of interest rates has 66 paragraphs. There are over 1 million paragraphs in the rulebook. Until the late 1970s, bank supervision was conducted by the Bank of England, of course, and it had around 30 employees responsible for overseeing banks. Since that time, the number of UK financial supervisors has increased dramatically, now to around 1,200. In 1980, there was one UK regulator for every 11,000 people employed in the UK financial sector. Today, there's one for every 300 people employed in the financial sector. I don't know how you would describe such a legal framework. My description probably can't be stated in polite company, but it certainly can't be described as unregulated free market capitalism. But it's not just the scope of the state in regulating private business which is the problem, it's the enormous scale of government spending. For all the talk of savage cuts and austerity, the coalition is reducing government spending in real terms by, at best, 1% per annum. By the time of the next general election, David Cameron will be spending about 97p for every pound Gordon Brown was spending when he was leaving office. George Osborne would have added about 600 billion to the national debt. That's about £10,000 for every man, woman and child in Britain. Our total national debt will stand at around £6 trillion, and the government will continue to spend at the rate of over £80 million an hour for every hour of every day. If that's austerity, I dread to think what largesse looks like. And the state, the size of the state in total, as a proportion of our total income, will be around about 50% of our GDP. 50p in every pound spent will be spent by the government in this country. And to put that into an international context, if you look at some of the fastest growing economies in the world, their state sector is around about 20% or so of GDP. Most estimates suggest that the former Soviet Union was at about 70% or so of GDP spent by the state sector. So in today's terms, the UK has a public sector that is perhaps closer in size to that of the Soviet Union than to some of the fastest growing economies in the world. This has to change. We don't just need to eliminate the deficit, we need to get much more savings out of the public sector overall. And that's not going to be easy. If you want to actually cut the state to, say, about 30% of GDP, sure, we can shut down some wasteful quangos. We can stop some of the more egregious examples of government spending. I also think there are whole government departments that can be closed down. The Department of Culture, Media and Sport? Culture, media and sport should belong to the people, not the state bureaucracy. The Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. Business, innovation and skills. Surely the three things governments are worst at. That department can be abolished overnight. But look, to really get state spending under control, you have to tackle some big areas. Let me take one: welfare. Total welfare spending, including state pensions, will stand at around £220 billion next year. For that sum of money, you could shove £10,000 in used banknotes through the letterbox of every front door in the country. Yet still, we have apparently not solved the poverty problem. If £220 billion isn't enough, what is? 250 billion? 300 billion? 400 billion? No. It's time to admit that our welfare system simply doesn't work. Let me suggest two ways that you might seek to change it. Firstly, rather than always seeking to tackle poverty by transferring money from the relatively rich to the relatively poor, we should instead look to put an end to government policies which put up the cost of living and start to embrace the sort of policies that would push the cost of living down. We need to overhaul our antiquated and inflexible planning laws. They've made it nearly impossible for young people to dream of even owning a home. We need to end agricultural protectionism in the form of the CAP or any other possible UK equivalent to reduce the price of food. We need to reverse the disastrous energy policies which make heating bills a huge burden on the average household. In the name of combating global warming, we actually risk people being unable to heat their homes and dying of hypothermia. Secondly, we need to overhaul our entire tax system. It needs to be flatter and simpler. But I'd encourage you to consider whether we also need to re-embrace the contributory principle. National insurance contributions have, to most intents and purposes, become just another income tax. Why not split the tax system as follows? Every worker would pay a certain proportion of their salary into their own personal national insurance account. Not a general pot, their own account. This might amount to, say, 10% of their overall earnings up to a certain amount each month. This would be ring-fenced as a personal savings account for you, not a cash cow for the government. If you required support because you're out of work, you'd dip into this pot. As you built up the pot over the years, it would help pay for your pension and the social care you needed in old age. This personal savings account would be yours, part of your estate for you to call upon in times of need. Secondly, there'd be a fairly low level of income tax, perhaps kicking in at around 11,000 or 13,000 or so per annum. This money would be used to pay for the general necessities of society, the armed forces, the police, the judicial system, and to top up the monthly contributions into their personal savings accounts of the poorest, those who are unable to keep their own contributions at an acceptable level to guarantee a reasonable future pension and the like. Such a system would be simple, would encourage personal responsibility, facilitate individual choice, and would be a huge leap towards ending the Ponzi scheme which the state system has become. I encourage UKIP to embrace it. I've heard your leader, Nigel Farage, describe the other three main parties as being the social democratic parties. I think he may have a point. I've also heard him asked about whether UKIP is merely a depository for protest votes that he's denied it. But I would have actually rather have thought that you would hope that UKIP is. I mean, there's an awful lot to protest about. I'd have thought that whichever political party can lay claim to the protest vote at the next general election will win by a landslide. But my real plea to you today is to focus on the third word in your party's name. If you can become the true party of independence, talking not just about the UK's independence from Europe, but about the need to fight for the independence of ordinary people against an overtaxing, overspending, over-regulating state, then I think you could make an even greater contribution to modern political debate. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your conference.